The shuttle was dying, and Mira Blackstone was running out of time. Emergency lights strobed across the twisted wreckage like angry fireflies, casting her shadow in jerky, desperate patterns against the buckled hull plates. Smoke poured from ruptured conduits, carrying the acrid stench of burning plasteel, and something far worse. The metallic tang that meant life support was failing. Through the haze, she could see her crew trapped beneath a massive cargo door that had torn loose. During the crash, its reinforced frame pinning them against the deck like insects under glass. "Boss!" Rico's voice cracked through the static of her cum implant, tight with pain and barely controlled panic. Can't feel my legs. Doors got us good." Myra dropped to her knees beside the debris, pressing her palms against the scorching metal. The door had to weigh at least 3 tons, maybe 4, with the twisted support beams welded to its frame by the impact. Even with a full exosuit and hydraulic assistance, moving it would be impossible. She had maybe 10 minutes before the shuttle's fusion core went critical, and her team would be vaporized, along with half the salvage field. "Stay with me, people," she whispered, though her words felt hollow. Behind the door, she could hear Poss crying quiet, stifled sobs that somehow hurt worse than Rico's pained cursing or Finn's labored breathing. Her crew, her family, the only constants in a life spent drifting between dead ships and forgotten battlefields. She pressed harder against the metal, feeling the heat sear through her gloves. This was her fault. She'd taken the contract despite. The warnings pushed them into the graven nebula where smart salvagers feared to tread. The ancient dreadnought they'd found had been too tempting pre-war tech worth enough to buy them a real ship, maybe even a legitimate operation. Instead, it had been a trap, some kind of automated defense system that had torn their shuttle apart the moment they tried to extract the core. "I'm not losing you," she growled through gritted teeth, pulling with every ounce of strength in her body. The door didn't budge, but something else did. The sensation started as a tingling in her fingertips, like static electricity building before a storm. Then it spread up her arms, a warmth that had nothing to do with the burning metal beneath her hands. She felt ... connected. To the door, to the shuttle, to the debris field spinning lazily outside. She could sense their mass, their weight, the invisible threads that bound them to each other and to the nebula's dying star. And she could change them. Myra's eyes widened as the massive door began to rise. Not slowly, not with the grinding protest of overtaxed motors, but smoothly, gracefully, as if it weighed no more than paper. She stood with it, her hands still pressed against its surface, watching in stunned silence as 3 tons of reinforced alloy floated upward like a bubble rising through water. "What the hell?" Rico's voice was barely a whisper. Her crew scrambled, out from beneath the impossible sight, dragging their injured limbs across the deck toward the emergency pods. But Myra couldn't move, couldn't look away from her own hands. The door hung suspended above them, held by nothing but her will and a force she didn't understand. She could feel it now, not just the door, but everything. The shuttle's hull, the asteroid they'd crashed into, even the distant wreckage of the dreadnought that had started this mess. All of it connected, all of it waiting for her touch. "Boss?" Poss's voice, small and frightened. "How are you doing that?" Before Mira could answer, a shadow fell across the shuttle's breached hull. Through the smoke and sparks, she saw a figure standing on the asteroid's surface, tall, humanoid, but wrong somehow. Its limbs were too long, its movements too fluid, as if it existed in a different relationship with gravity than the rest of the universe. It wore no environmental suit, seemed to need no protection from the vacuum or the radiation that poured from the nebula's core. The figure stepped closer, and Mira caught a glimpse of its face beneath a hood that seemed to be cut from the fabric of space itself. Ancient eyes, older than the stars, fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. When it spoke, its voice reached her not through her cum system, but directly into her mind. "You must be a god." The words hit her like a physical blow, and her concentration shattered. The cargo door crashed down onto the deck with a sound like thunder, missing her crew by inches. Emergency alarms shrieked as the shuttle's core finally gave up its struggle, and Mira felt the familiar tug of emergency teleportation as their ship's AI yanked them to safety. But even as the salvage field dissolved around her in a wash of quantum static, she couldn't shake the image of those ancient eyes, or the certainty that her life had just changed forever. Whatever she had done, whatever power had flowed through her hands, it was only the beginning. In the medical bay of their carrier ship, as Rico's legs were splinted and Paz's burns were treated, Myra stared at her reflection in the polished metal walls. Her hands looked the same, scarred from years of salvage work, stained with grease and radiation burns. But beneath the skin, she could still feel it. The connection, the power. The door had been just the start. Vendor Kess had seen gods before, and they always disappointed him. His three-chambered heart beat in irregular rhythm as he sifted through the stolen memories floating in his private vault, each one a crystalline sphere containing someone's most precious or painful moments. The vault itself defied conventional physics, a pocket dimension carved from folded space-time, accessible only through the neural implants that replaced his original Vorthic cranial ridge. Here, in the shadow markets of Terminus Station, privacy was currency and secrets were religion. The memory he sought glowed amber among the thousands, its surface crackling with residual psychic energy. He plucked it from its suspension field with 4 delicate fingers, feeling the weight of 10,000 years of accumulated knowledge. The label, written in his own flowing script, read simply, "The Maker's Final Testament." As the memory dissolved into his consciousness, Kess experienced the last moments of the architects, the precursor race that had shaped the galaxy before vanishing into myth. Through dying eyes, he watched as they sealed away powers too dangerous for mortal minds. Ability to bend reality itself, to treat the fundamental forces as malleable clay. They had called themselves gods once, these architects. Before their hubris nearly tore existence apart, the vision faded, leaving Kess trembling in his hoverchair. Somewhere in the galaxy, that power had awakened again. At gravitational anomalies. In the Graven Nebula, the reports of impossible salvage operations, the whispers among his information network, all pointed to one conclusion. A new god had been born, and she didn't even know it. His cumweb chimed with an incoming data stream. Security footage from the nebula, purchased from a down-on-his-luck cargo hauler for the price of a synthetic liver. Kess watched the human. Woman Myra Blackstone, according to the ship's manifest, lift 3 tons of reinforced alloy with nothing but her bare hands. The casual impossibility of it made his gill slits flutter with excitement. "Magnificent," he whispered in his native tongue, the words triggering bioluminescent patterns along his neck scales. Utterly, terrifyingly magnificent. But magnificence drew attention, and attention in his line of work was often fatal. Already, his sensors were picking up increased chatter from the hegemony's intelligence networks. The corporate syndicates were mobilizing their acquisition teams. Even the bone ships had altered course toward the outer rim, their captains scenting opportunity like predators following blood trails. Kess initiated a deep space transmission, his neural implants interfacing directly with the station's quantum entanglement array. The message was simple, encoded in trade pidgin and routed through 17 proxy servers. Salvage operator Blackstone. I have answers to questions you haven't learned to ask. Meet me at the floating gardens. Come alone, or watch the galaxy burn for your ignorance. He sealed the message with his personal encryption, fragment of his own childhood memory, the scent of flowering crystal trees on a world that no longer existed. If she was truly what he suspected, she would understand the weight of that offering. While he waited for her response, Kess began preparing his most dangerous merchandise. Memory spheres containing fragments of architect technology, psychic impressions of their final experiments, even a perfectly preserved neural map of their home dimension. Each item was worth more than entire star systems, and each carried the potential to drive lesser minds into gibbering madness. But if Mira Blackstone was indeed an architect's heir, she would need every advantage he could provide. The forces already moving against her would not be satisfied with mere capture. They would dissect her, study her, try to replicate her abilities for their own ends. The galaxy had spent millennia recovering from the last time someone had wielded that kind of power carelessly. His cobweb chimed again. A response, brief but telling. 1 hour. I'll bring my crew. Kess allowed himself a thin smile, his needle-sharp teeth glinting in the vault's ambient glow. She was protective of her people, a weakness he could exploit, or perhaps a strength. That would keep her grounded when the power inevitably tried to consume her. Either way, their meeting would determine whether the galaxy faced a new golden age or its final destruction. He began selecting his finest wares, humming an ancient trader's song as he worked. After all, he had always prided himself on customer service. Captain Torvin's flagship had once been a space leviathan, a creature of living void that had swum between stars for 1,000,000 years before his ancestors had killed it and carved its bones into a vessel of war. Now the ossuary drifted through the asteroid field like a predator made of calcium and death, its hull gleaming white against the cosmic dark. From his command throne, carved from the creature's skull and still warm with residual life, Torvin watched the tactical display with the patience of a hunter. His target was close now, so close he could almost taste the fear radiating from the small salvage vessel ahead. But this was no ordinary prey. The woman aboard that ship could bend gravity itself, and that made her either the most valuable prize in the galaxy or its most dangerous weapon. Range to target? He asked, his voice a low rumble that seemed to emerge from the ship's bones themselves. 12,000 kilometers in closing, Captain, replied his first mate, a scarred veteran whose left arm had been replaced by a writhing mass of ship nerves that interfaced directly with the vessel's nervous system. Their engines are damaged. We'll have them in 30 minutes. Torvin nodded, running one massive hand along the throne's armrest. He could feel the ship's heartbeat through the bone, slow and steady and hungry. The ossuary had tasted blood recently, a merchant convoy that had foolishly tried to run the Spine Nebula, and its appetite was temporarily sated. But this hunt was different. This was about power, about the kind of prize that could elevate his fleet from mere pirates to rulers of the Outer Rim. Sir, called his sensor operator, a young woman whose eyes had been replaced by targeting arrays. I'm reading massive gravitational distortions around the target vessel. Whatever she's doing, it's affecting local space-time. Excellent, Torvin breathed. Signal the fleet. Begin the bone dance. Around the ossuary, 13 other vessels began to move in perfect synchronization. Each ship was a masterwork of organic engineering, grown from the skeletons of different void creatures and bonded with living metal that responded to their crew's collective will. The bone dance was their signature tactica, spiraling attack pattern that confused enemy sensors, while bringing overwhelming firepower to bear from multiple angles. But as they closed in on their prey, something extraordinary happened. The salvage ship didn't run. Instead, it turned to face them, its damaged hull gleaming with impossible energies. Torvin watched in fascination as debris from the asteroid field began to orbit the smaller vessel, creating a defensive screen of whirling metal and stone. Chunks of rock the size of buildings moved with the precision of synchronized dancers. while twisted fragments of ancient warships arranged themselves into complex geometric patterns. "By the void's edge," whispered his first mate. "She's weaponizing the entire field." Torvin felt his pulse quicken with something he hadn't experienced in decades' genuine excitement. His fleet had conquered worlds, broken the backs of entire civilizations, but he had never faced an opponent who could treat reality itself as a malleable resource. This woman, this gravity witch, might actually provide him with a challenge worthy of his reputation. "Open a channel," he commanded. The view screen flickered to life, revealing a human woman with short dark hair and eyes that seemed to hold the weight of collapsing stars. She looked tired, desperate, but there was steel in her posture that spoke of someone who had never learned to surrender. "I am Captain Torvin of the Bone Fleet," he announced, his voice carrying the authority of 100 conquered systems. "You will surrender yourself to my custody, or I will reduce your vessel to component atoms." The woman Mira Blackstone, according to his intelligence files, actually smiled. "Counteroffer," she said. "Turn around and leave, or I'll show you." What happens when someone who doesn't understand physics gets really, really angry? Before Torvin could respond, the asteroid field exploded into motion. Rocks the size of city blocks accelerated to impossible velocities, while streams of metallic debris wove themselves into projectile patterns that should have been mathematically impossible. His ship's defensive screens flared as the improvised weapons struck with the force of relativistic impacts. "Evasive maneuvers," Torvin shouted, but the bone dance formation was already breaking apart under the assault. 3 of his vessels were forced to retreat, their hulls cracked by impacts that defied every law of momentum and energy conservation. This was no mere human with a lucky mutation. This was something far more dangerous and far more valuable than he had imagined. As his flagship shuddered under another impossible barrage, Torvin found himself grinning with savage delight. "Signal the fleet," he ordered. "Full engagement. And prepare the harvesting equipment. One way or another, that woman's power will be mine." The ossuary screamed as it dove toward its prey, its bone hull singing with anticipation of the hunt to come. Whisper existed in the spaces between heartbeats, in the pause between thoughts, in the quantum foam that separated one moment from the next. To call them a being would be inaccurate. They were more concept than creature, a living embodiment of the silence that dwelt in empty space. But now, as reality fractured around the human woman's growing power, Whisper found themselves pulled inexorably toward the material plane. The sensation was deeply unpleasant. Existence had weight here. Substance, the brutal limitations of linear time and 3-dimensional space. Whisper coalesced slowly, their forms shifting between states of matter as they struggled to maintain coherence in a universe that insisted on defining everything in terms of mass and energy. Through the dimensional membrane, they could see the battle raging between the Bone Fleet and the Gravity Witch. Space itself was wounded, bleeding exotic particles as Mira Blackstone's untrained power tore holes in the fabric of causality. Each impossible maneuver, each gravitational impossibility, sent ripples through the quantum substrate that connected all realities. And through those ripples, other things were beginning to notice. Whisper manifested fully as the battle reached its crescendo, their translucent form appearing on the bridge of Torvin's flagship without sound or ceremony. The pirate captain's crew reached for weapons that would be useless against something that existed partially outside their dimension, but Whisper raised a hand that seemed to be made of crystallized vacuum. "Peace," they said, their voice a harmony of frequencies that shouldn't have been audible in normal space. "I come with warnings, not weapons." Torvin himself seemed frozen, caught between his predator's instincts and the recognition that he faced something entirely beyond his understanding. "What are you?" he demanded. "I am what remains when sound dies," Whisper replied. I am the pause between words, the gap between stars. And I am here to tell you that your hunt has awakened things that should have remained sleeping. They gestured toward the view screen, where Myra's ship continued its impossible dance through the asteroid field. But now, Whisper could see what the others could not: the growing tears in space-time, the hairline fractures spreading through reality like cracks in breaking glass. Her power is untrained, chaotic, Whisper explained. Each use creates resonance, patterns that echo through the dimensional boundaries. Already, entities from the far dark have taken notice. They probe the barriers, testing their strength, waiting for an opening large enough to allow passage. Torvin's scarred face paled. Even pirates who sailed the void between stars had heard whispers of the far dark, the space outside space, where things that had never been born writhed in eternal hunger. You're saying she's going to tear reality apart? Not intentionally, Whisper said. But power without understanding is the most dangerous force in any universe. The architects learned this truth too late. They tried to seal away their abilities, to prevent others from making their mistakes. They failed. A new voice cut through the bridge's tense atmosphere, Myra Blackstone's transmission, broadcast on all frequencies. I don't know what's happening to me, she said, and for the first time, Whisper heard genuine fear in her voice. But I can see ... things in the spaces between space. They're trying to get through. Whisper nodded grimly. The humans developing. Sensitivity was accelerating, her consciousness expanding beyond the narrow confines of her native dimension. Soon, she would be able to perceive the far dark directly, and that perception alone might be enough to shatter the barriers completely. There is a place, Whisper said, their form beginning to fade as the effort of maintaining coherence in normal. Space exhausted them. The architect's final laboratory, hidden in the quantum shadow of a collapsed star. If she can be brought there, if she can learn to understand what she has become, there may still be hope. And if she can't? Torvin asked. Whisper's last words echoed through the bridge as their form dissolved completely. Then pray that oblivion comes quickly, because what follows will be far worse than mere death. In the silence that followed, captain and crew watched as Myra's ship suddenly ceased its impossible maneuvers. The asteroid field went still, debris hanging motionless in space as if time itself had paused. But Whisper could still feel them out there, pressing against the barriers, drawn by the scent of possibility and the promise of a universe ripe for conquest. The far dark was patient. It had waited since before the first star ignited. It could wait a little longer. Thorn had been dreaming of equations for 3,000 years. In the crystalline suspension chamber, buried deep within the neutron star's quantum shadow, his consciousness had drifted through mathematical landscapes that mapped the fundamental structure of reality. He dreamed of forces and constants, of the delicate relationships that held existence together, of the terrible knowledge that had driven his people to extinction and beyond. The architects had called themselves gods once, in the arrogance of youth and the intoxication of unlimited power. They had learned to manipulate gravity, time, space itself, treating the universe as a vast instrument to be played according to their whims. But power corrupts understanding, and understanding, without wisdom, leads inevitably to catastrophe. Thorn remembered the last days, the reality storms that had consumed entire sectors, the dimensional parasites that had fed on collapsed possibilities, the growing realization that their gifts were not blessings but curses, inheritance from entities that dwelt in the spaces between thoughts and fed on the dreams of sapient minds. A suspension chamber's alarms brought him back to wakefulness with reluctant gentleness. His body tall, graceful, no longer entirely human after millennia of quantum engineering, responded slowly to the revival protocols. Through the chamber's transparent walls, he could see the laboratory, that had been his tomb and temple, its surfaces covered with equations that described how to unmake a universe. "Status report," he whispered, his voice cracking from disuse. The facility's AI responded in harmonies that bypassed his ears and spoke directly to his modified neural cortex. Dimensional barriers compromised. Reality distortion detected in the Graven Nebula sector. Pattern analysis suggests architect-level manipulation. Probability of cascade failure, 67% and rising. Thorn closed his eyes, feeling the weight of inevitability settle on his shoulders like a familiar coat. Somewhere out there, someone had inherited the curse. Someone was discovering that they could bend the universe to their will, never knowing that each use made them less human and more something else, something hungry. "Show me," he commanded. The laboratory's walls dissolved into displays, showing the battle between pirates and salvagers, the impossible gravitational fields, the tears in space-time that leaked exotic radiation into normal space. At the center of it all was a human woman whose eyes had begun to glow with the light of collapsing stars, Mira Blackstone. The reading said she was 32 years old, born on an orbital habitat raised by scavengers. Nothing in her genetic profile suggested architect heritage. But that meant nothing. The gift could lie dormant for generations before manifesting, triggered by trauma or desperation, or simple proximity to the right quantum resonances. "Bring them here," Thorn said quietly. "Sir, the facility's location is classified at the highest levels. The neutron star's gravitational field will not trouble someone who can manipulate gravity itself." Thorn finished. "Send the coordinates. Use the architect emergency protocols. She understand, even if she doesn't know why." As the AI complied, Thorn began preparing the final chamber, the place where his people had made their last desperate choice. Machinery was still functional, still capable of the ultimate sacrifice. But first, he would try to save her. Try to teach her what he had learned too late. 3 hours later, Mira Blackstone's ship materialized inside the facility's docking bay, reality rippling around its hull like water disturbed by a stone. She emerged alone, her crew remaining behind at his insistence, and walked through corridors that had not seen life for 3 millennia. When she finally reached the central chamber, Thorn was waiting. "You're beautiful," he said, and meant it. She burned with potential, with power that could reshape galaxies or tear them apart. "And you're dying." She stopped a dozen paces away, her hand resting on a weapon that would be useless against him. "You're one of them. The architects. The last," he confirmed. "We made ourselves extinct to prevent this moment. Apparently, we failed." "The voices," she whispered. "I can hear them now. They're calling to me from somewhere else. Somewhere dark." Thorn nodded sadly. "The far ones. They are what we became in the end. What you will become if you continue down this path. The power corrupts not just the body, but the soul, makes you into something that can no longer distinguish between self and universe. Eventually, you forget that other minds exist as anything more than extensions of your will." He gestured too. The chamber around them, to the equations carved into its walls in his own desperate hand. "There is a choice. The same choice my people faced. You can allow me to sever your connection to the quantum substrate, become human again, powerless but free. Or you can embrace what you're becoming. Accept the transformation, the responsibility, the terrible isolation that comes with godhood. Guard the barriers between dimensions. Keep the far ones from breaking through. Live forever as the universe's protector, knowing that you can never again touch another mind without destroying it." Mira stared at the equations, and Thorn could see the moment when understanding dawned in her eyes. The mathematics were beautiful and terrible, describing the precise methodology for severing a consciousness from the quantum foam that connected all things. "If I choose to remain human," she said slowly, "what happens to the barriers, the tears I've already made? They will heal in time, but slowly. And if other architects awaken ... there will be no one to stop them." Thorn waited, watching, as she wrestled with a choice that no mortal mind should have to make. In the end, he knew what she would decide. It was what he would have chosen in her place. What he should have chosen when he still could. "I'm sorry," Myra said, and stepped forward into the transformation chamber. The light that erupted from the machinery was the color of newborn stars and dying hopes. When it faded, the woman who had been Mira Blackstone was gone, replaced by something vast and terrible and utterly alone. She looked at Thorn with eyes that held the weight of galaxies, and he saw in them the same isolation that had driven his people to their final choice. "Thank you," she said, her voice now carrying harmonics that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously, "for showing me what I had to become." Thorn smiled as his own body began to fade, the last of his life force finally exhausted. "Guard them well," he whispered, "and try to remember what it was like to be human." As the laboratory fell silent around her, the being who had once been Myra Blackstone turned her attention to the stars. Somewhere out there, reality was wounded, and it was her responsibility now to heal it, no matter the cost. The far ones pressed against the barriers with renewed hunger, sensing the presence of a new guardian. But they would find no weakness here, not while she watched, not while she remembered the weight of a cargo door in merely human hands, and the crew who had trusted her to save them. Some prices were worth paying. Some loneliness was a fair trade for the continuation of everything that mattered. In the depths of space, the last god began her eternal vigil.